The night before my wedding, I reread my mother's text. Don't expect us to play any role in your ceremony. Useless girls don't get walked down the aisle. I closed my phone and signed the last document no one in my family knew about the purchase agreement for the entire mortgage debt on the building where my parents housed their law firm. Tomorrow, when the processional music played, I'd walk with someone else and the entire reception would learn who was truly useless. My name is Elena Hart, and 6 months ago, at what should have been a celebration of my engagement, my family reminded me exactly where I stood in their hierarchy of disappointment. The private dining room at Marcello's gleamed with polished mahogany and crystal, the kind of place my parents chose when they wanted to impress. Robert and Linda Hart sat at the head of the table, my father's silver hair catching the candlelight as he raised his glass to my brother Dylan, not to me, the one actually getting married. To Dylan, Dad proclaimed, his voice carrying that courtroom authority he never turned off. Our pride and joy, who just secured another round of funding for his venture. I watched Dylan preen, his third failed startup somehow still earning more praise than anything I'd ever accomplished. My fiancé Ethan squeezed my hand under the table, his calloused fingers rough from 12-hour shifts in the ER, a quiet reminder that someone saw my worth. Speaking of the wedding, I ventured when the toasts died down, keeping my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. I wanted to discuss the ceremony, specifically, who will walk me down the aisle. Mom's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. Oh, Elena, surely you've arranged that already? We assumed you'd ask one of Ethan's relatives. I'm asking you, I said, looking directly at my father. Both of you. I'd like my parents to walk with me. The silence stretched taut as a wire. Dylan smirked into his whiskey. Dad set down his fork with deliberate precision. That's traditionally an honor reserved for parents who've invested in their children's success, he said, each word measured. We've poured everything into Dylan's ventures. Your little administrative job hardly warrants. It's not administrative, I interrupted, the lie I'd maintained for 4 years burning my tongue. I work in compliance. Paper pushing, Dylan chimed in, loosening his designer tie. While some of us are building the future, Elena makes sure forms are filed correctly. Real game-changing stuff. Mom touched her pearls, her tell when she was about to deliver what she considered wisdom. Sweetheart, walking a bride down the aisle is a statement. It tells the guests, we're proud of what our daughter has become. And frankly, she gestured vaguely at me, at my simple black dress that cost less than her handbag. You haven't given us much to be proud of. I graduated summa cum laude, I said quietly. I've been promoted 3 times in 4 years. I'm getting married to a doctor who saves lives every day. Participation trophies, Dad dismissed. Dylan's company could revolutionize sustainable packaging. That's legacy material. You're perfectly adequate. Elena. But adequate daughters don't get walked down the aisle like princesses. Find someone else. Maybe Ethan's uncle, I heard he's quite fond of you. The words adequate and useless might as well have been tattooed on my forehead since childhood. Every family dinner ended with Dylan's achievements on display while mine were footnotes. The forensic accounting certification I'd earned while working full-time, barely mentioned. The algorithms I'd developed that flagged money laundering patterns, they didn't even know about those. She doesn't need this. Ethan finally spoke, his voice low but firm. Elena has built something incredible, even if you're too blind to see it. Dad's eyes narrowed. Built what a mediocre career in financial services. My paralegal makes 6 figures. Dr. Cole, that's not success that's settling. I stood slowly, gathering my coat. The irony nearly made me laugh. My mediocre career had generated enough capital to acquire controlling interest in their building's debt through 3 shell companies. My paper pushing had created a compliance system that 7 regional banks now relied on, generating monthly revenues that dwarfed Dylan's burned venture capital. You're right, I said, surprising them with my calm. I should ask someone else, someone who actually invested in my success. Mom's face softened with false concern. Don't be dramatic, darling. We'll attend the wedding, of course. We've already told the Whitakers about it. We'll need proper seating perhaps near the commissioner's family, and Dylan should give a toast. Dylan won't be giving any toasts, I said, pulling on my coat. And your seating will be wherever the venue coordinator puts you. As we left, Ethan wrapped his arm around me. You okay? I thought about the contracts in my home safe, the ones that would activate in 6 months, the building deed, the debt obligations, the carefully structured acquisition that would give me leverage over Hart and Whitaker attorneys at precisely the right moment. I'm perfect, I told him, meaning it for the first time in my life. Absolutely perfect. Growing up in the Hart household meant enduring nightly performance reviews disguised as family dinners. Every evening at 6:30 sharp, we'd gather around the dining table, Mom's inherited Wedgwood china gleaming under the chandelier for what my parents called achievement roll call. Dylan, start us off, Dad would say, cutting into his steak with surgical precision. And Dylan always had something: debate team captain, mock trial winner, acceptance to Georgetown Law, internship at Morrison & Forster. Each accomplishment earned him a nod of approval, a smile from Mom, another deposit into his trust fund. Elena. Dad's tone would shift, expectant yet already disappointed. I made the dean's list again. I'd offer. And my data analytics professor wants me to assist with her research on financial crime patterns. Data analytics, Mom would repeat, like she was tasting something bitter. Such a technical field, not very personable. Is it Dylan's building relationships that will last a lifetime? You're building what? Spreadsheets. The word useless first appeared when I was 15. I'd won the state mathematics championship, beating out 900 other students. That same week, Dylan had been elected student body president of his law school. Look at your brother, Dad had said. The local newspaper spread before him with Dylan's smiling photo. Future senator material, and you. He'd glanced at my trophy, small and gold and apparently worthless. Math competitions don't open doors, Elena. They just prove you're good at useless puzzles. By 17, I'd internalized it. When my calculus teacher suggested I apply to MIT, I didn't even mention it at home. When I was accepted with a partial scholarship, I told my parents I was going to State University instead. Why waste their time with my useless dreams? You're making the smart choice, Mom had said, relief visible in her shoulders. State is perfectly adequate for someone like you. Save the Ivy League investments for Dylan. Someone like me, the daughter who preferred algorithms to arguments, who found beauty in balanced ledgers instead of legal briefs, the one who built things quietly, in the background, without fanfare or recognition. I remember the night I asked them for startup capital. 22 years old, fresh out of college, with a business plan I'd refined for 18 months. I needed $50,000, a fraction of what they'd given Dylan for his first venture. Let me understand, Dad had said, reading glasses perched on his nose as he flipped through my proposal with visible disinterest. You want to create software that helps banks identify suspicious transactions. It's more sophisticated than that, I'd explained, my hands shaking slightly. It uses machine learning to identify patterns that human analysts miss. Small community banks can't afford the big compliance systems, but they're still required to meet federal regulations. My software would put you in competition with established firms that have decades of experience. Dad interrupted. Elena, sweetheart, you're not leadership material. You're a behind-the-scenes person, support staff. There's no shame in that. The world needs worker bees too. But the potential market is irrelevant when you don't have the personality to sell it, Mom added gently, like she was doing me a favor. Dylan has charisma. He can walk into a room and command attention. You'd rather hide behind a computer screen. That's not CEO material. Darling, that's assistant material. Maybe you could work for Dylan once his company takes off. They'd given Dylan $200,000 that same month for a craft beer subscription service that folded within a year. The rejection had cut deep, but not as deep as their casual dismissal of everything I was. That night, I'd sat in my cramped apartment, laptop open to my business plan, and made a decision. If they wouldn't invest in me, I'd find someone who would. And when I succeeded, not if, when I'd keep it hidden. Let them think I was their useless daughter pushing papers at some forgettable firm. Oh, why didn't you tell them? Ethan had asked when I finally shared the truth with him 3 years into building Marigold. Why let them keep believing you're nobody special? Because, I'd said, watching my revenue projections climb steadily upward on my screen. The element of surprise is worth more than their approval ever could be. They made their choice about who I am. When the time comes, I'll show them who I actually became. That time was almost here. 6 months until the wedding. 6 months until they'd learn that their useless daughter had been playing a longer game than they'd ever imagined. That every dismissal, every adequate, every comparison to Dylan had been fuel for something they couldn't fathom. Quiet, calculated, complete success. The mathematics championship trophy still sat on my desk at Marigold's offices, no longer useless but prophetic. After all, I'd always been good at solving complex problems. My family just happened to become one of them. The birth of Marigold compliance systems happened at 3:45 a.m. in my studio apartment, fueled by gas station coffee and pure spite. After my parents' rejection, I'd taken a compliance analyst position at Cleveland Community Credit Union, the kind of place my father would call where careers go to die. But I saw something else opportunity. Small banks and credit unions were drowning in federal regulations. They couldn't afford the million-dollar systems that Chase or Wells Fargo used, but they faced the same penalties for non-compliance. My supervisor, barely understanding the requirements himself, spent 12 hours a day manually reviewing transactions. One missed suspicious pattern could mean a $50,000 fine. I built the first prototype in my spare time, teaching myself to code through online tutorials and library books. The algorithm was elegant in its simplicity. It learned from patterns, flagged anomalies, and most importantly, it explained its reasoning in plain English that regulators could understand. You need funding, Ruth Alvarez told me 6 months later. I'd met her at a fintech conference I'd snuck into with a borrowed badge. She was everything my parents claimed I'd never be commanding. Successful, self-made, but more importantly, you need to stay invisible until you're too big to ignore. Why invisible? I'd asked, clutching my laptop with its precious code. Because in this industry, young women with good ideas get bought out or pushed out before they can build real value. You want revenge on someone. She'd studied me with knowing eyes. The best revenge is massive success they never saw coming. Ruth became my silent partner, investing $200,000, exactly what my parents had given Dylan to fail with. We incorporated in Delaware, kept the ownership structure opaque, and I continued working at the credit union while building Marigold at night. The first sale came 8 months later. Lake Erie Community Bank needed a solution yesterday. They'd just failed a regulatory exam. My software cleaned up their processes in 6 weeks. They passed the follow-up with flying colors. Don't celebrate yet, Ruth warned when I showed her the $40,000 check. Reinvest everything, scale carefully, and whatever you do, don't let your family know. So I didn't. At family dinners, I was still Elena from compliance, while Dylan burned through another round of funding for his revolutionary app that was just Uber for laundry. Meanwhile, Marigold quietly signed its 10th client, then its 20th. Year 2 brought state-level contracts. The Ohio Department of Commerce needed a system to monitor state-chartered banks. Our bid came in at half the cost of the big firms. With twice the accuracy rate, we won. How's the paper pushing? Dad asked at Thanksgiving that year. Fine, I said, carving turkey while mentally calculating our third-quarter projections. Steady. Steady is another word for stagnant, Dylan added, fresh off another failure. I've pivoted to blockchain now, the future of finance. I nodded politely, thinking about the $3 million in revenue Marigold had generated that year. Year 3 was when Ruth introduced me to real estate. Software is good, she said over lunch at a quiet bistro, But real power comes from owning the ground people stand on. The Rust Belt Renewal Fund was her brainchild, but I provided the capital Marigold was generating enough cash flow to invest. We focused on distressed commercial properties in declining Midwest cities, the kind of buildings whose mortgages had been packaged and resold so many times that nobody knew who owned what anymore. Including this one, Ruth said one day, sliding a folder across her desk. Whitaker Tower, familiar. My heart stopped. The building where Hart and Whitaker operated, where my father had practiced law for 20 years. The mortgage was in distress. The previous owner had defaulted, and the note was being sold at 30 cents on the dollar. It's poetic, Ruth observed. They're literally standing on shaky ground. I bought it through 3 layers of shell companies, keeping my name off everything. The building needed $800,000 in repairs that the current owners couldn't afford. My father's firm was already behind on rent, though he'd never admit it at family dinners. By year 4, Marigold had 43 employees, though I still told my family I was working in compliance. We'd expanded into 3 states. Our algorithms had prevented over $12 million in potential money laundering, and our annual revenue exceeded Dylan's lifetime venture capital raises. "You're playing a long game," Ethan said one night, watching me review contracts for another acquisition. "The longest," I agreed, initiating another document that my family would never know about. My parents taught me I was useless. Ruth taught me that useless people have the advantage of being underestimated. The email came that evening. Hart and Whitaker had requested a meeting with their new landlord about restructuring their debt. They had no idea they'd be negotiating with their useless daughter's representative. Not yet. The text from my mother arrived at 11:15 p.m., 2 weeks before the wedding. "Don't expect us to play any role in your ceremony. Useless girls don't get walked down the aisle. We'll attend as guests. Nothing more." I stared at my phone, sitting in my home office surrounded by contracts and financial statements. Ethan read it over my shoulder, his jaw tightening. "They're actually going through with it," he said quietly. "Of course they are." I pulled up another text, this one from Dylan. "Need a quick loan. Sis, $50K. Blockchain startup needs bridge funding. Dad says you should help family since you're not spending on a fancy wedding anyway." The audacity might have been funny if it hadn't been so perfectly timed. While denying me the basic dignity of parental participation in my wedding, they were simultaneously treating me like an ATM. "Are you going to respond?" Ethan asked. "Oh, I'm going to do better than that." I opened my laptop and pulled up the Rust Belt Renewal Fund portfolio. Remember how the Gable House was having financial troubles? The Gable House at Riverside, our wedding venue, had been struggling for months. The owner had confided in me during a planning meeting that they might have to close before our date. What she didn't know was that her mortgage holder was about to sell the note to settle their own debts. "You didn't," Ethan said, but he was smiling. "Closed yesterday." Ruth handled the paperwork. The Gable House is now officially owned by one of my LLCs. Our wedding venue is secured, and I've already approved the renovations they desperately needed. "That's why you're terrifying," he said, kissing my temple. "But what about your parents?" I pulled up another document, the latest notice from Whitaker Tower's debt servicer. Hart and Whitaker was now 4 months behind on rent. Plus, they owed $300,000 for their share of building renovations they'd agreed to but couldn't afford. "Mom just sent out save the dates to all their society friends," I said, scrolling through her Facebook. The Whitakers, the Brennans, Judge Morrison, the entire partnership at Dad's firm. She's been bragging about the elegant affair and how Dylan will be giving the main toast as the family representative. But Dylan isn't? No, he's not. But they don't know that yet. I opened a new document and started typing. "I'm going to give them exactly what they deserve, a public education in consequences." The next morning, I met with Ruth at her office. She reviewed my plan while sipping her espresso, occasionally raising an eyebrow. "The timing is aggressive," she said finally. "You're essentially planning a hostile takeover disguised as wedding festivities. They disguised emotional abuse as parenting. Seems fair? And the letter of demand will be delivered during the reception. After the toast, they're not expecting me to make. Ruth leaned back, studying me. You could just confront them privately, force them to acknowledge what you've built. They had 20 years to acknowledge me privately. They chose public dismissal instead at every family gathering, every introduction, every chance they got. This is Dylan, our successful son, and Elena. She works in an office. So, public restoration? Public reckoning, I corrected. There's a difference. That afternoon, I got another call from the Gable house, but this time as the owner, not the bride. The manager was ecstatic about the approved renovations and wanted to confirm the special arrangements for my wedding. The documents will be delivered by my legal representative during the reception. I confirmed. 3 sealed envelopes to be handed to Robert and Linda Hart after my speech. And if they refuse to accept them, they won't. Their business partners will be watching. Dylan called that evening, his voice pitched with fake concern. Hey, sis, heard you're having some drama about the wedding party. Want me to talk to Mom and Dad smooth things over? What would that cost me? I asked dryly. Come on, don't be like that. We're family. Although, if you could see your way to that loan… Dylan, you've burned through $800,000 of other people's money. What makes you think I have $50,000 to spare? Because I know you've been saving forever. You never spend on anything fun. You drive that ancient Honda. You probably have every penny from your boring job sitting in some savings account. If only he knew those boring job pennies had multiplied into millions, that the ancient Honda was a choice, not a necessity, that I could buy his failed companies 10 times over with just the interest from Marigold's reserve accounts. I'll think about it, I said instead. Think fast. Mom's planning to seat you behind the pillars at your own wedding unless you play nice. After I hung up, Ethan found me in the kitchen, stress baking at 11:45 p.m. You sure about this? He asked. Once you pull this trigger, there's no going back. I thought about every dismissive comment, every public humiliation, every time they'd made me feel small and worthless while propping up Dylan's failures as victories. They pulled the trigger years ago, I said, sliding cookies into the oven. I'm just finally returning fire. Ruth arrived at my apartment at 9:30 a.m., the day before the wedding, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing the kind of smile that had terrorized boardrooms across Ohio. You ready for this? She asked, setting the portfolio on my dining table. I've been ready since I was 15, I said, pouring her coffee. Show me the documents. She laid out 3 sealed envelopes, each one crisp white with the Rust Belt Renewal Fund watermark subtle but official enough to command attention. Envelope 1, she tapped the first, transfer of ownership for the Gable house, showing that as of this week, the venue is under your control through Marigold Holdings LLC, includes the renovation approvals and the fact that you've personally guaranteed every wedding booked for the next year. 2, she continued, the demand letter for Hart and Whitaker. There's $600,000 in arrears, combining back rent and renovation obligations. Standard restructuring terms, they can negotiate a payment plan or vacate within 60 days. The kicker. The letter explicitly states that the building owner is willing to negotiate in good faith if they can demonstrate the same. And 3, Ruth's smile widened. The scholarship announcement, the Useless No More Fund, established in memory of your grandmother Elena, for whom you were named, $100,000 annually for female STEM students in Cleveland, funded entirely by Marigold's dividend distributions. I picked up the scholarship envelope, thinking of my grandmother who died when I was 10. She'd been a bookkeeper in an era when women weren't supposed to understand numbers. My parents had barely mentioned her at the funeral, embarrassed by her working-class roots. The presentation timing is crucial, Ruth said, pulling out a timeline. Your speech is scheduled for 8:45 p.m. After dinner but before dancing. My paralegal will be stationed at table 12, ready to deliver the envelopes on your signal. And you'll be walking you down the aisle at 2 p.m. sharp. Her voice softened. If you still want me to. You're the only person who believed in me when I had nothing but code and anger. I said, Of course I want you to. Ruth had been more than an investor. She'd been the mentor my parents should have been. When I'd doubted myself, she'd pushed. When I'd succeeded, she'd celebrated. When I'd wanted to reveal everything too early, she'd counseled patience. "Your parents RSVP'd, by the way," she said, checking her phone. "They've requested seats at table 2, with the Whitakers and Judge Morrison. Dylan confirmed he's bringing a +1 some investor he's trying to impress. Move them to table 7. That's near the kitchen doors. It's where they put me at Dylan's celebration dinners. They'll recognize the symbolism." That afternoon, my wedding coordinator called with a minor panic. "Ms. Hart, your mother is here. She's insisting on reviewing the seating chart and making some changes. Is she now?" I grabbed my keys. "I'll be right there." I found Mom in the Gable House's main ballroom, her designer heels clicking on the newly refinished floors, refinishing I'd paid for. She was holding court with the coordinator, gesturing dramatically. "The Hart family table needs to be moved to the front," she was saying. "We're immediate family, not distant relatives." "Mother." She turned, her face shifting to practiced disappointment. "Elena, I was just fixing the obvious errors in your seating arrangement." "There are no errors." "Table 7. Really, your father is a founding partner of one of Cleveland's most prestigious firms." The optics," I interrupted, "of parents who refused to walk their daughter down the aisle requesting VIP seating are what, exactly?" The coordinator excused herself quickly. Mom's lips pursed. "You're being dramatic. We explained our position. You haven't earned—" "I heard you the first 100 times. Table 7 stands." "This is vindictive. This is generous. Dylan's +1 doesn't have a seat at all unless he confirms her name by tonight." She stared at me, perhaps seeing for the first time that I wasn't backing down. "What's happened to you? You used to be so accommodating." "I used to be 22 and desperate for your approval. Now I'm 32 and I've learned that your approval is worthless." "How dare!" "The venue coordinator works for me now," I said quietly. "The seating chart stands as I've arranged it. If that's unacceptable, you're welcome to decline your invitation." I left her standing there, mouth open, designer bag clutched like a shield. That evening, Ethan helped me pack the envelopes in my wedding emergency kit, along with tissues, safety pins, and the backup flash drive containing every contract, every deed, every piece of evidence of what I'd built while they weren't watching. "Tomorrow changes everything," he said. I thought about Ruth's hand in mine as we'd walk down the aisle, about the 3 envelopes that would rewrite my family's understanding of power, about the moment they'd realize their useless daughter had been playing chess while they'd been playing favorites. "No," I said, sealing the kit. "Tomorrow just reveals what's already changed." The processional music began at exactly 2 p.m., Pachelbel's cannon flowing through the Gable House's speakers. From behind the antique doors, I heard the collective rustle of 200 guests rising to their feet. Ruth stood beside me, elegant in her navy dress, her silver hair swept into a chignon. She offered me her arm. "Ready to show them who you really are?" "I've been ready my whole life." The doors opened. The aisle stretched before me, lined with white roses and baby's breath, simple, elegant. Nothing like the ostentatious displays my mother had pushed for. At the altar, Ethan waited, his smile breaking through my nervous energy. But it was the faces turning toward me that I catalogued. The Whitakers in row 3. Judge Morrison behind them. Dad's law partners scattered throughout all the people my parents had bragged to about Dylan. All the ones who'd heard I was just working in compliance. And there, at table 7, visible through the ballroom's open archway, sat my parents. My father's face had gone rigid. My mother's hand flew to her pearls. The whispers started immediately. "Who's that with Elena? Isn't that Ruth Alvarez, the real estate developer? Why isn't Robert walking her down?" Ruth and I moved forward with measured steps. She'd coached me on this chin-up, shoulders back, smile soft but confident. Don't rush. Let them look. Let them wonder. Dylan, seated with his flavor of the week investor, actually stood up partially. confusion clear on his face. He'd expected me to walk alone, maybe with Ethan's uncle, defeated and embarrassed, not with one of Ohio's most successful businesswomen on my arm. When we reached the altar, Ruth kissed my cheek and whispered, "Give them hell, kid." The ceremony itself was a blur of vows and rings, Ethan's steady presence anchoring me, but I was already thinking ahead to the reception, to 8:45 p.m., to the moment of truth. The cocktail hour was delicious torture. My parents held court at the bar, Dad explaining to anyone who'd listened that they'd encouraged Elena to choose someone who truly supported her career. Mom added how they'd always believed in independent women making their own choices. "Interesting spin," Ruth murmured, appearing at my elbow with champagne. "Your father just told Judge Morrison that you work for me." "Technically true. In a way, Marigold does contract with your properties. He has no idea you own the building he's standing in right now. Does he?" "None." Dinner service began at 6:30. I watched from the head table as my parents discovered their seats at table 7. The flash of indignation on Mom's face when she realized they were next to the kitchen doors was perfect poetic justice in table assignment form. At 8:15, Dylan approached the microphone, clearly planning his unauthorized toast. I caught the DJ's eye and shook my head slightly. The music continued. Dylan stood there, confused, tapping the dead microphone before slinking back to his seat. At 8:43, I rose. "Thank you all for being here," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the room. "I want to share something about the journey to this day." The room quieted. Ethan squeezed my hand under the table. "Many of you know me as Robert and Linda Hart's daughter, the quiet one, the one who, as I've heard my father say, works in some kind of financial services." I saw Dad shift in his seat. "What you don't know is that I've spent the last 4 years building something while staying in the shadows." I clicked the remote. The screen behind me lit up with Marigold's logo. Marigold Compliance Systems. We protect 43 financial institutions across 3 states from money laundering and fraud. Our algorithms have prevented 12 million in illegal transactions. Our annual revenue exceeds $8 million. Gasps rippled through the room. Dylan's investor date was frantically Googling on her phone. "But that's not all." Click. The Rust Belt Renewal Fund logo appeared. "Through strategic real estate investment, I've acquired several properties you might recognize." Click. A photo of the Gable House, including this venue, which I purchased this week to ensure not just my wedding, but every couple booked here this year could have their perfect day. The murmurs grew louder. My mother had gone pale. "And finally," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Hart & Whitaker Attorneys operates in Whitaker Tower." Click. The building's deed transfer document, with my LLC clearly visible as the owner. A building whose debt I now control. The room erupted. My father shot to his feet, his face purple. But I wasn't done. I was told repeatedly that I was useless, that I wasn't worth walking down the aisle, that I should be grateful to be adequate. I looked directly at my parents. "So I built an empire while you weren't watching. And now, I have some documents to deliver." I nodded to Ruth's paralegal. She rose from table 12, 3 white envelopes in her hand, and walked directly to table 7. The paralegal placed the 3 envelopes on the table with practiced precision. My father stared at them like they were explosive devices. Around him, his law partners leaned in. Judge Morrison adjusted his glasses, and the Whitakers exchanged worried glances. "Open them," I said into the microphone, my voice calm. "Or don't. But everyone here should know what they contain." Dad's hands shook as he reached for the first envelope. His face went from purple to ash white as he read. Mom snatched it from him, her gasp audible even from across the room. "The Gable House," I explained to the audience, "is now protected from predatory price increases and sudden closures. No couple will have their wedding destroyed by financial manipulation." The second envelope made Dylan shoot to his feet. "This is bullshit. You can't what?" I asked. Can't own the building where our parents' firm operates. Can't request payment for $600,000 in back rent and renovations. The terms are standard more generous than market rate. Actually, all they have to do is negotiate in good faith. You vindictive little, Dad started, then stopped, realizing every potential client in Cleveland was watching. The third envelope, I continued, ignoring his outburst, announces the useless No More Scholarship Fund, named for grandmother Elena, who kept books when women weren't supposed to understand numbers. $100,000 annually for young women in STEM who've been told they're not enough. I found the young server from the catering staff, Maria, who'd mentioned earlier she was studying computer science at community college. Maria, would you come here, please? She approached nervously. I handed her a check. The first scholarship, for someone who's working 2 jobs to fund her education, who's been told community college isn't real college, who's building her future one shift at a time. Maria's mother, working the kitchen, visible through the service door, pressed her hand to her mouth. "This is extortion," Dylan shouted. "She's trying to humiliate us." "No!" Ethan stood, his voice cutting through the chaos. "She's trying to survive you. There's a difference." Ruth rose next, commanding instant attention. "I've watched Elena build 2 companies from nothing while her family called her useless. Every document delivered tonight is legal, ethical, and justified. If the Harts would like to dispute any of it, they're welcome to try. In court, against the daughter they claimed wasn't lawyer material." The room was electric with tension. Phones were out, recording everything. My father's carefully curated reputation was crumbling in real time. 10 minutes, I said, checking my watch, 8:55 p.m. "You have 10 minutes to decide. Accept the restructuring terms and keep your office, or vacate within 60 days. No negotiations through intermediaries. You'll deal directly with me." "We're your parents," Mom's voice cracked, the perfect composure finally breaking. "Yes," I agreed. "The ones who refused to walk me down the aisle 2 hours ago. The ones who gave Dylan $800,000 while telling me I wasn't worth 50. The ones who've introduced me as our other child for 15 years. Dad stood slowly, his courtroom presence attempting to reassert itself. "Elena, surely we can discuss this privately. Like we discussed my wedding privately, when you texted that useless girls don't get walked down the aisle." I pulled out my phone, projecting the message on the screen behind me. The timestamp clear 2 weeks ago, 11:15 p.m. The collective intake of breath from the wedding guests was sharp. "Robert," Judge Morrison said quietly, but his voice carried, "I think you should consider the terms." One of Dad's senior partners was already on his phone, probably calling an emergency meeting. The Whitakers had stood and were making their way to the exit. Dylan's investor date was typing furiously, likely reporting to her firm that the Hart family was in crisis. 5 minutes, I announced. Mom was crying now, but they weren't tears of shame or regret. They were tears of rage at being exposed. Dylan was pacing, phone pressed to his ear, probably trying to find a lawyer who wasn't currently watching his family implode. "You planned this," Dad said, his voice hollow. "For years." "I planned to build something. You planned to keep me small. We both succeeded initially. Only one of us planned for the long term." "Time!" Ruth called. My parents looked at each other, then at the room full of witnesses' clients, judges, colleagues, friends who'd heard them dismiss me for years and were now seeing the truth. Dad picked up the restructuring agreement with shaking hands. "We'll review the terms." "Wonderful," I said brightly. "Ruth's office, Monday, 9 a.m. Bring your financials, all of them." I handed the microphone back to the DJ. "I believe it's time for our first dance." As Ethan led me to the dance floor, I heard Dylan one last time. "You couldn't just let it go." I turned back once. "No, Dylan, that's what useless daughters do. I'm something else entirely." The music swelled. Ethan pulled me close, and we danced while my family's world rearranged itself around the truth I'd finally told. The dance floor cleared after our first dance, but nobody left. They stayed, watching, waiting to see how this unprecedented drama would conclude. I stood at the gift table, now repurposed for my final move, and placed 2 manila envelopes next to the wedding card box. My parents remained frozen at table 7, the 3 original documents spread before them like tarot cards revealing their future. Dylan had stopped pacing, his phone dark in his hand apparently. Emergency legal counsel was hard to find at 9:30 p.m. on a Saturday. Before anyone leaves, I announced. Not needing the microphone this time, the room was silent enough to hear a pin drop. I have 2 final documents. Dad's jaw clenched. Mom gripped her pearls so tight I thought they might shatter. Option 1, I held up the first envelope, is a settlement agreement. Signed tonight, and Hart & Whitaker continues operating in Whitaker Tower under a restructured payment plan. Fair market rent, reasonable terms, and a clear path forward. Ruth will oversee the negotiations to ensure good faith on both sides. And option 2, Dad's voice was hoarse. Vacancy notice. 60 days to relocate Hart & Whitaker. The building will be renovated and leased to businesses that understand the value of every person who walks through their doors. You're destroying your family, Mom whispered, but her voice carried in the silence. No, I said simply. I'm refusing to be destroyed by it. I walked over to their table, Ethan beside me, and placed both envelopes in front of them. Up close, I could see the calculation in Dad's eyes, the lawyer in him reviewing options, measuring losses. You have until the venue closes tonight, I said. 11 p.m. Dylan finally spoke, his voice cracking. What about me? What about family loyalty? Family loyalty? I laughed, but it wasn't bitter, just tired. You mean like when you told investors I was your secretary to explain why I was at that fintech conference, or when you borrowed my laptop and tried to steal my code for your own startup? His face went red. His date's eyes widened. I didn't think you knew about that, he muttered. I know about all of it. Every dismissal, every insult, every time you both chose him over me despite his failures. I looked at my parents. But I'm not punishing you for choosing him. I'm succeeding despite it. Judge Morrison approached our table, his wife beside him. Elena, he said formally, that was quite a revelation. I had no idea you were behind Marigold. We've been looking for a compliance system for the courthouse's financial departments. I'll have my team call Monday, I said smoothly, handing him my real business card, CEO, Marigold Compliance Systems, one by one. People approached not my parents, but everyone else. Business cards exchanged, congratulations offered, connections made. The very network my parents had tried to keep me from was now seeking me out. At 10:45 p.m., 15 minutes before deadline, Ruth approached my parents' table. They'd been sitting in silence for an hour, watching their colleagues court their useless daughter. Have you decided? She asked professionally. Dad looked up, aged 10 years in one evening. The restructuring agreement. We'll sign. Excellent choice. Ruth produced a notary seal because of course she'd brought one. Sign here, here, and initial here. They signed in silence while their former peers witnessed. The pen scratched against paper, finalizing their humiliation, but also their survival. One more thing, I said, approaching for the last time. The Useless No More Scholarship. It includes a mentorship component. I'll be personally mentoring each recipient. I looked at Maria, who was still clutching her check with tears in her eyes. Starting Monday, if you're interested. Yes, Maria burst out, then blushed. I mean, yes, please, Ms. Hart. It's Mrs. Cole now, Ethan corrected, wrapping his arm around me. But Elena works fine. My parents stood to leave, Mom clutching Dad's arm like she might collapse. They had to walk past me to reach the exit, no other route available. Dad paused, met my eyes. For a second, I thought he might apologize, might acknowledge what I'd built, might see me for the first time. Instead, he said, "We'll see you Monday at Ruth's office." They left, Dylan trailing behind them, his date having disappeared sometime during the signature process. The celebration continued until exactly 11 p.m., when the Gable House officially closed. As the last guest departed, I stood in my wedding dress in the empty ballroom, surveying my kingdom, my venue, my victory, my vindication. "No regrets?" Ethan asked, pulling me close. "None," I said, meaning it. They called me useless. I proved them wrong. The end. The beginning, he corrected, kissing me as the lights dimmed. And he was right. It was the beginning of my life without their shadow, without their judgment, without needing their validation. I'd taken their worst insult and built an empire on it. The useless daughter had won. Thank you for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Have you ever been underestimated by your own family? How did you prove them wrong? I read every comment and would love to hear your experiences.